I'm going to give this a sync. Sweet. Welcome to the Monkey Dance Podcast. This is Ohan, and I'm sitting here with Arev Papazian. Hi, Arev.
Hello.
So I'm going to kick it off to you directly. Why don't you tell us who you are and what you do?
I am doing a PhD in social anthropology here at CEU. It's my 5th year, so post-fieldwork. I'm in the process of writing the thesis. And I mean, in one line first, I look into, through the case of Lake Sevan in Armenia, I look into nature management. And I try to answer the question of how the line is put between nature use and nature preservation. Should I already go into details or?
Yeah, definitely. Just jump right into it.
Okay. So I'll start maybe with the conceptual, and then we can move to the empirical, although I must say that in anthropology, the empirical is very important, so I cannot just talk conceptually without using the empirical examples and the example of the case of my fieldwork. So I will, not soon enough, I will also explain what are the specificities of the field site where I did my research. But first, about the more general conceptual questions that I'm looking into. So I combine anthropological, sociocultural anthropology approaches with political ecology frameworks. And that also means that I use a little bit of geography and environmental history to try to look, to try to understand how nature or how natures are managed, when and why they're either used or they're preserved, and who decides this. So there is a very thin line that separates the decision or the actions of either using parts of nature or preserving them, conserving them. And this applies differently according to different parts of nature and according to different places, contexts. And it's interesting to understand what are the social structures and the power dynamics that are guiding these decisions, either conscious or unconscious, and by different groups of people. It's a very, when I try to put it in words, when I try to conceptualize it, it becomes a very clean representation of what is happening, but actually it's a very messy, chaotic mosaic of social relations and power structures, and we can get more into that when we're talking about the field. But it's so there are different social processes and systems that have that play a role in this shifting and in the construction of this line. It's an abstract line of, okay, where do we stop using nature? At what point do we have to think about preserving it? And for whom? Why? Who decides it, etc. These are the questions that I try to, that I deal with. And so once you go, the second layer of this would be understanding how states function, how capitalism, the system we live in now, functions, and what type of relationship they have with nature. And I say a relationship with nature because it's not that they are only acting upon nature, but they are also heavily dependent on it. They cannot be reproduced without nature because they are part of it. They are anchored in it. So I do not. I follow those scholars who argue for, who reject the separation between nature and society, that dualism. and who see humans, and so also the systems that humans have created and they live with as part of, like, as one element, one species of the whole of nature and of those ecological relations. Which also means that, like, when we look at it that way, then we understand that it's also, so for example, this room we're sitting in is nature. That's like, there has been an abstraction that has separated society and humans from the material relations of nature. And we've started thinking about nature as being only that wilderness. So we go to a trip into the nature and then we come back to society. But this society that we're living in, this room, this microphone, all the elements of it come from nature. They are different chemicals that are that come from different mines. And so when we stop putting that separation, we instead we stop thinking about just instead of thinking about what are humans doing to nature, why are we facing an environmental crisis like climate emergency, etc. The explanation wouldn't be that, oh, humans are overusing nature, or but instead we will look at the processes and the different systems that have established a certain type of relationship with the non-human nature. So I do, like, it's not that we should, it's one thing to say society and nature don't come as a binary, but it's another thing for the usefulness of explanations, to say human nature or non-human nature. So like whenever I'm referring to the microphone, that's non-human nature. So, I mean, we can still think about and talk about a certain relationship between humans and non-human nature without putting humans on a different layer or pedestal. So, what was I saying? So yeah, instead of giving an explanation as saying what humans are doing to nature, we instead start to think, what are the processes and the systems that establish a certain type of relationship where our use of the chemicals to make this microphone are reaching the limits of using nature or that certain material? Or why do we shift from cars that use fuel to cars that function with electricity? And what does that mean what does that do to our relationship with nature? It's not that we're not using nature anymore, like non-human nature anymore, or that because I'm using chemicals to make batteries to produce electricity, then I am more ethically, that's more it's okay, it's more validated to do that, unlike using fuel. We have to understand what is the context behind it, and what are the discourses, and what happens both materially speaking but also discursively. There are also a lot of efforts that go into making us believe or start thinking that, using the chemicals and the batteries is better than using the fuel. Why is that? I'm not saying that it's not, or it's not doing research about these things, it's not about, because people often ask me, what do we do to save Lake Sevan, the lake that I'm studying? My job is not to, or as researchers, we don't necessarily have the answers to this is ecologically more correct to do, this is not. It's more a task to understand what are the underlying relations that exist and structures and discourses and what they do to nature, but also to communities. And that is what I focus more on. So this is like the overall framework, but my research is actually like firsthand with communities. And yeah, like I will try in my thesis to bridge the empirical data, the conversations that I've had with people on the ground, with these concepts that exist in the literature. So yeah, I can continue, but if you have any questions first.
I think I'll have you continue, but I guess some of the main things are just the fact that there's no clear defining line between what nature is and what it isn't, which is firmly agree with. Very happy that that's a starting point. And the second is sort of when we breach the boundary between, or trying to define what the boundary is of the proper type of extraction of resources, but then also of sustainable use of those resources. Because I guess the problem is how much we use, and there's a problem of replenishability from a natural side. But then, of course, there's the problem of access to resources on the human side. And then, of course, something that often gets ignored is just access to resources from the animal kingdom outside of the human race, right? Is that we deny a lot of non-human animals access to resources so that we can access it. So there's this whole issue, which then once you put sort of government and society over, which are, ostensibly ways to figure out what that distribution of resources ought to be, then it gets even more complicated because you have personal incentives at play. So this is sort of the how we might jump into the work that you're doing, right?
Yeah.
Okay, right on.
And I guess, so I will first maybe talk about the lake and put it in context, and then come back to these conceptual questions, especially about the state, capitalism, and what anthropology brings to this. Because, so I think there are a lot of, there are very good works and theories by geographers, for example, or environmental historians, that in a very clear way explain how, let's say, what is the relationship of capitalism with nature. But things get much complicated when you look at what's happening on the ground. And it's so that's why I'm trying to combine these two approaches to try to give an explanation that stays true to the complexities and the messiness of the real life. But we'll come to that after I've presented the real life. So Lake Sevan is a high altitude freshwater lake in the current Republic of Armenia, and it occupies almost like the basin of the lake occupies 1/6 of the surface of the Republic. So if you look at the map, you also notice a huge blue space, and so just to give a sense, there are several villages on each coast, towns and villages. The coast is around, I think the whole perimeter is 200 something kilometers. So it's quite big.
Yeah.
The depth it has two parts. One, the narrow part is deeper than the bigger part, and I think it's the maximum depth goes to 70 something kilometers. And the locals call this a sea. I'm going to the sea. So it's maybe also because Armenia doesn't have a sea, but it also speaks to the vastness of the lake. If you stand not everywhere, but if you stand, there are some points where you can see a horizon, you can't see the coast, the other coast. So it's a very big lake. And there has always been, always, but for centuries, I could say, there has been fishing going on and settlements there. And the locals now tell stories about how their ancestors got settled there, and most of the stories are about refugees coming from the western parts, so what was at the time Ottoman Empire, and like walking, seeing a body of water, taking a bucket to drink water and noticing that it's abundant with fish, the bucket. So like they've seen that and they've decided to stay because they can make a living out of it, so they can sustain themselves. So and every time that now there is a discussion over banning fishing or stuff like that, they tell these stories that's like we've always been here for the fish. This is what we live with. Other people live through the land, through the cultivation of the land. We don't have fertile lands because it's a very rocky area and it's high altitude, so the temperature also doesn't allow to have good agricultural production. But we have the lake, we have the fish. So like this is to give context to why the locals are often hurt when they're treated as like not having the right to access the fish. Whereas, like according to them, they say, for example, they come and sell us because I'll go into that later. So I try to remember this. Tell me tomatoes so that I can remember this story. Okay, so what's happening with the lake? Why is there what's the fuss about it? So there has always been fishing. In Tsarist times, it was like there were privately owned, boats that were fishing boats that were private, but the locals would use it to fish and would pay some tax to the owner. Then during Soviet time, there was a fishing state-owned enterprise that was created. So fishing became a big industry, and so it's also, of course, progressed over the time. The amount of fish that was caught, and there was a technological change in the boats and the techniques to catch the fish. And it has become part of it's an important source of food, not just for Armenia, but during Soviet times for the whole population of the Soviet Union. And along with that, there has also been, so as the fishing was increasing, the fish stocks were decreasing. Also because with the yearly plans of the Soviet economic, the 5-year plans, there were always high targets put for how much fish should be caught, and it really was abundant, in I don't know, thousands of tons per. I can't tell numbers. I don't remember, but so. Along with the decrease of the fish stock, they started breeding new types of fish. Sorry, not new types. They started breeding fish to restock. And so this is already a reminder that the breeding of fish, we could think of it as, during Soviet times, they were environmentally conscious. They were preserving the fish by breeding it. But actually, it was part of a big industrial plan to restock and to be able to keep fishing and to keep producing food for the empire, for the Union. So what complicates the situation is that in the 30s, 40s, there was a huge hydropower cascade built to extract water from the lake, to produce electricity and to irrigate lands. And in the eastern part of Armenia, there are now lands, that's the area that secures nowadays the country, agriculturally speaking, with the products. with fresh products. But that was a very arid land. It wasn't fertile. It has made fertile through the water of the lake. And so this also shows that humans or different systems, even socialist systems, and we can talk about that, again, there are debates about, is it capitalism? Is it modernism? What is the system that has accelerated ecological changes? Or can we say that maybe Soviet Union was capitalist? It just was a state capitalism. But that would be going too much into history. So it has always, states and economic systems have always changed natural landscapes. So with the very big amounts of water being extracted from the lake, the water level dropped in 5-10 years. It had dropped by almost 20 meters. And it's since then that a lot of ecological, the ecological change that would naturally happen, but it has been accelerated. And the scientific term of it is eutrophication. It's when the lake turns into a swamp eventually. So because the level is, I can't go too much into details about the natural science facts, but because the level is lower, sun rays reach the bottom much faster, the water becomes warmer faster, so that creates the conditions for algae to bloom. The fish, the endemic trout, in Armenian called ishkhan, prince, it has slowly become almost extinct already from Soviet times. Because it reproduces, it lays its eggs on the rocks of the rivers that feed the lake. But now so it swims up the streams. But now that whenever the level dropped, that fish couldn't swim and reach the higher, the rocks that remained at a higher level. So it couldn't reproduce as easily. And so, fast forward to the present. So I often go back to the past, by the way, because I think it's a continuum, and we cannot understand the present without understanding what happened in Soviet times. And it also because, analytically speaking, it shows us that states and these systems have always, it's not a new 21st century or it's not a new thing that we are changing, or it's not the coming back of the state, because there are some arguments about the market taking over for a long time during neoliberalization, and then slowly now states are coming back. Actually, states have always been there. They have always acted as mediums and as also for their own reproduction. They've always had a certain relationship with nature, and they've always changed it and relied on it. So that's why the past is important. There is much more to talk about Soviet times, but I'll come to the present now. So that water level. One last thing that happened in Soviet times. To fix this problem, the solution was to, I'm simplifying now a lot, jumping through events. The solution was to build tunnels that deviated water from other rivers to feed the lake to increase the water level. So again, the solution was about making a huge landscape change somewhere else. And so this also speaks of the that separation between nature use and nature preservation. In terms of, to be able to preserve Lake Sevan, we are using and changing the landscape or waterscape of another place. Also, another thing is that when the nuclear power plant was built in Armenia, there was some space for reducing the water intake from Lake Sevan. But when there were protests to close down the nuclear power plant because of radiation and pollution, at some point it was closed down. Then the water intake increased again from Sevan. So it's the nature is related, and we are constantly dependent on it. So whenever we're preserving something, that means we're putting more weight on somewhere else. And vice versa. If we want to preserve that, then we'll have to start reusing what we have been preserving so far. Okay, now to the present. The Soviet Union collapsed during those, in the 90s, that are called colloquially the dark and cold years. There was no energy because suddenly Armenia was isolated, not only because of the collapse of the Union, but also because Turkey and Azerbaijan closed the borders. So all the national conflicts also emerged with the collapse of the Soviet Union. There was a big earthquake. So during those years, there was a very big toll put on Lake Sevan. The electricity was almost only coming from the waters of Lake Sevan. Fish was very cheap food during those almost famine years. And so the fish stock almost depleted. And then in 2004, there was a ban on fishing, a complete ban. But electricity was still being produced. But eventually the nuclear power plant got reopened. And so there was some balance established. But now what's happening is that eventually there was a law in 2001. A law was adopted about a law about Lake Sevan. That's the name of the law. So it's for saving Lake Sevan.
Okay.
What's the different regulations.
What is the name in Armenian?
Sevanala Jimasin Orenk.
Okay, nice.
And that law tries to regulate not only fishing, but also the use of the coastlines, because there were many resorts built on the coastline. And if you want to re-increase the water level, those would go underwater. So there is resistance from the owners of those resorts, which are often oligarchs. There is resistance to the attempts to increase the level. But also there are some scientists who say that the water level increase is not a solution anymore because it's so hard to maintain it. And when from 2005, after this law was adopted till early 2010s, the level did increase again due to attempts of because of there was a cap put on how much water can be taken out, etc., etc. But a lot of both organic forests and also other infrastructure like electricity poles and stuff and houses remained underwater, and that creates it adds to the organic material that is going into the lake, and that creates more algae, and so it's the counter process of what we want to do. That's why there is according to some scientists, the solution wouldn't be increasing the level. There are some small hydropower plants also built now on the rivers that feed the lake, and those also make it hard for the fish to reproduce. Wastewater goes directly into the lake, so one big solution would be to create canals. But again, there we go to questions of state, what does the state do? Why are these processes not happening or not being completed? Because there are always attempts to make them happen. So now the situation is that the lake is still undergoing this fast eutrophication process. There is still risk that it will turn into a swamp. But now we have more regulations and more laws. But there is a disagreement on how the law is implemented and also what it is about, or what are the priorities. And there are different groups of people who have different knowledge regimes or different interests. And that creates conflict and debates over the management of the lake. And that also takes us back to the questions of what are we using, what are we preserving, and for whom, and who is deciding this? And that's where my research comes in. But I focus mostly on fishing. So I did fieldwork for... I stayed in Armenia for 15 months in the beginning, and then I revisited for like a month every summer for 2 years. And I was doing some interviews in Yerevan, in the capital city, with different environmentalists, state employees, especially high-ranked state employees who are in Yerevan, like ministry, people working in the Ministry of Environment, for example, or scientists in the Academy of Sciences. But most of the time I was in and around Sevan, either in the town of Sevan, where the Sevan National Park non-commercial governmental office is located. And I did I tried doing an internship there. So I spent a lot of time with the state employees, but most of whom are locals. So they are often in between the different discourses, the official state discourse and narrative, and the local one. So it's very interesting to look at their perspective and what they say and what they do to understand this conflict. And I also spent a lot of time within fishing communities. I went to fishing trips with some fishers. I tried to watch like how they make smoked fish. I talked to like different people working on a different in the chain of the production, doing different jobs. So the fishing net threader, like the woman who makes the thread. The fisher itself, fish sellers, then women who make smoked fish out of the fresh fish. And yeah, I ate a lot of fish. And I just hung out with them, with different people in that community, to also understand how they live, what they do in their day-to-day.
And just to clarify, the fishing of the Ishkan is banned, but there's a white fish that was introduced, and that's what's abundant and you're eating.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So in the 50s, 1950s, already in Soviet times, because industrially white fish is more profitable, white fish was introduced from other lakes, from 2 lakes in Russia. It was brought to Lake Sevan. Some people even say that it's the white fish that killed that dominated the ecosystem, and that's why the endemic trout, died. But not everyone agrees with this. So yeah, white fish reproduces very fast. It has much more the number of eggs in the
sack.
Is very big.
A lot of caviar.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's why, like, now the fishing of the trout, the ishkan, the endemic fish, is banned. But also you cannot catch it even if you want to. I mean, if they can, they take it and they sell it in the restaurants around the lake for very high prices because it's real ishkan. Because you can also eat, like nowadays in Armenia, you could eat pool, like basin raised outside of the lake ishkan, which according to the locals doesn't taste the same, of course, and it's cheaper. So if you find real ishkan, then it's precious. But you don't. It doesn't come into the net. So most of the fishing that is happening is white fish. And So from 2004, as I said, it was banned, but it was always like fishing didn't stop. It was just officially banned. And this already says something. So, for example, when I went there, one other law-related explanation. So from 2004, it was completely banned. Then in 2019, there were some reports by the scientists of the Academy of Sciences that the whitefish numbers have been restored. So there was rather than a ban, what is happening now in the last years is a reintroduction of the legal fishing season. And it's a bureaucratization of the fishing economy. And that's what I kind of witnessed firsthand, because those were the first years of the establishment of this new bureaucracy and of the legal period. But what happened is that with this legal period being introduced, the ban got intensified. So like the surveillance for the ban got intensified, because it could be justified with the legal period. So we are giving you a period when it's legal to fish. You can fish then. Now you have to abide by the law and not fish. When it was banned all along, not fishing would mean dying of hunger. And everyone knows that people there live with the fish. And it's really not just a fisher, because, as I said, there are people making nets, there are the sellers, there are the resellers, those who make smoked fish, and those who buy it for cheap. It's cheap food. So like the poor families live with that. So yeah, like when I got there, the bureaucratization had already started. It was the second year that they were trying it. So this again, like the boundary between when you can catch fish, when not, when it's legal, when it's not, it was not that clear cut. It's still not that clear cut, but now they're making attempts to be stricter during the ban, so it's a bit more respected.
Does that mean more militarization around? Or
yes,
police?
now yes.
Right.
Yes.
Police presence.
So I'll come to that.
Okay.
But so when I went there, I thought that during the period of the ban, I'm just not going to see anyone fishing. But it was, I was surprised to see that even then, it was Christmas time, and during Christmas, you have to have fish. And the only difference was that they were going at night to buy the fish from the stores, and to buy the caviar even. And so the reasoning of having the ban during that time, like in December, January, is that that's the reproduction window of the whitefish. But that also means it's the time when the whitefish is abundant, or not abundant, but it comes up to because it moves they move in groups to go and find a place to lay their eggs. So they are very active. Whereas in summer, let's say, they go down to the bottom of the lake. Also in summer, it is the fish gets spoiled much faster when you take it out of the water. So and not many people buy it, so it's less beneficial to fish in summer. Whereas during this period of ban, the reproduction part, that's when they make most of profits, which also means that's when they can pay off their debts, for example. So like most of these people, there is an assumption that the fishers are accumulating, like piling money out of fishing, especially during this period. But even if they catch much more, and they do gain more during this period, the amount of debts that they have and the types of dependencies that they have, like they are often dependent on the store owners or fish sellers who have the capital to give them nets, for example, in like loaned with loaned money, or to give them the boat. And the fishers are usually either taking debts of cash, or relying on using the material needed for the fish from those who have the capital.
It's a capitalized form of feudalism, basically.
Yeah. So whenever, even when they're gaining a lot from fishing, most of the time that money goes to paying off debts. And that what annoys them when they're blamed for and criticized as being criminals and stealing the fish, whereas they are just trying to feed their families and pay off debts. And so that's why they rely on this period of reproduction of the fish. And so the economy is still, the fishing still continues, but it's just the public secret. Everyone knows about it, but they won't. It takes time for you to understand that. Okay, there are weird silences, metaphors used, that you need to spend some time there to enter into that space, that more intimate space where the secret is revealed. But everyone knows that it's happening. The fishing is happening.
Do you have any metaphors that they use, just as an example? Just curious. It might be hard to remember one, but...
Yeah. I was trying to read some things before coming to remember the stories, because I've forgotten the details of the stories. But for example, I remember that I was at someone's place and it was Christmas, and they finally 1 day, 2 days before Christmas, they were able to secure fish at night. And then I was watching them and filming them clean the fish, and there was lots of caviar.
Oh, amazing.
In the belly of the fish. And the woman told me not to film during that part. And she said, now Arev will go and report us to the police. But so in those instances, they are careful. So you see that there is, something is not ordinary. But if you ask them, or for example, when she said that, we finally got fish, I said, was it an issue because it's banned? She said, no, it's okay. You can, that's not an issue. It's just that it's my mother's, she had recently died, the mother, and during Christmas they have to do a big feast in memory. So that, she explained that stress through those those cultural reasons, and not the illegality. But then when it came to being filmed, she was still cautious. And it's those instances that show that there is a secret. Okay, where am I getting with this? I can get lost in the stories and... Okay, I can talk about the. So this is the context, in terms on the communal level, of people trying to live with the fish, a new law being introduced, and they're navigating this space of legality, illegality, the boundary between the two, trying to sustain their living at the same time, but also knowing that. The lake is changing, ecologically speaking, and it's not that they're not aware of that, or that they don't know that fishing contributes to that. And they also even say that we know when to stop fishing. We know that this is the reproduction, the period of spawning, and we do want to let the fish reproduce, because we also want to have more fish later. But there is always this tension between them and what they think they see as the period when they should stop or as the reason why they should stop, and between what the official state says. And they think that, for example, they often say that these people are sitting in their offices, they haven't even touched a fish, and they're coming and telling us when to fish, when not to fish. Whereas we are the ones who see when the fish is abundant, when it's reproducing. So it's also this, like, when I said different knowledge regimes, their knowledge of the environment is through the tangible, what they see, what they experience firsthand. Whereas the knowledge that comes from the state, the official state's bodies, is the numbers, the data on paper of like how much fish there is. And that means the type of measurement of the fish, which is also very much debated. And like who is collecting that data, through which technology? There are also debates around that. So on different layers, there are always groups that are questioning the knowledge of the other group. And through that, debating either the timing of the ban or the reason why it is being implemented, or the part of the nature that is being saved. So, for example, the fishers say that you are not letting us fish, but you are letting the oligarchs build their houses on the coast. You are letting them extract water and produce electricity and sell it and put that money in their pocket, whereas we're just trying to feed our families. So again, which part of nature, in this case, which part of the lake is being used and which part is being preserved is always debated. So that separation line constantly shifts depending on who you ask and which part of the lake you're talking about. And so I guess the context is clear now. We can go into examples of these different conflicts and these debates. But I also don't want to
that's
bore
perfect.
with too much specific, like particular examples.
I think the interesting thing is that this is such a probably applicable case study for so many lakes around the world, right? In that even coastal fishing communities, not on a lake, there's always the issue of who's getting the right to use it, right? Who's getting access to the resources, and there's always the problem of potential overreach from the state, posturing from the state, and then, of course, corruption. The oligarchs that might be involved in any local situation. And you also get this issue, it seems, of turning Sevan into a monument, right? Like this idea that Sevan ought to be preserved for the sake of Sevan being preserved without any consideration of, what happens to the ecology, inclusive of course, humans. Mm-hmm. And the idea that you might have overused the water in Sevan and then extract water from other places to fill Sevan is so antithetical, right? I mean, that's ridiculous. So it's really interesting how politicians can jump on the bandwagon of a cause and then just say, okay, these people's plight is more visible, and so we can make others suffer so that we can, remedy one aspect of the problem here and get a political win. So it seems like that's one of the big struggles there.
Yeah, exactly. And also, not also, but in this case, it is clear, I think, that there is, at least visibly, and now in the last 2 years, there have been more efforts to build, for example, wastewater infrastructure. But that's also complicated because you need funds for it. You need to make a lot of changes and build canals and stuff. But there is not a big fanfare. There is not a big advertisement about it, as much as there is for the ban of fishing. So as if in these last 5 years, from 2020, when this bureaucratization started and the regulation of fishing became intensified, it is always accompanied with the propaganda of the accomplishments of the state, and the Yeah, and that is absent in other cases. And I think this has something like it's a little bit of it's a bit about performing environmentalism. It can be just for the sake of it, to show that look, we're careful, we care about the environment. But the critique is that you do say that, but at the same time you give licenses to exploit mines. That would also even pollute the rivers that reach the lake. So what's the point of regulating fishing if you're not regulating other things that would end up putting the lake in a worse situation? So it can be about that performance. It can be about market competition. For example, the fishing economy had been so far dominated by local oligarchs, like local fish sellers who would buy the fish from those people, as I said, who have the money to pay for the nets and the boat for the fisher, and the fisher is dependent on them. And they also have factories to make conserved fish and then export it. And this bureaucratization is it's making things a bit transparent in a way. So the state bodies would have access to this information of who is catching how much. I'm not saying that they can really do it, because a lot of it keeps going on. They can just write something on the paper and then still fish more. But it's the attempt of the government to turn things legible, as we say it. And so the role of the state comes this. So if we want to move from the abstract notion of the state intervening and the state managing nature, the processes through which it does that are these, making things legible, turning things into numbers, having statistics of who is fishing how much. In other contexts, having maps, dividing the lake into sections and zones of where you can have what type of production, what type of structures, built structures, etc. So, and there are many theories about this, how the state turns nature and populations, they're part of nature, as I said, legible, measurable, and it has to do this to be able to govern. So this is Foucault biopower, and also we can there are also now concepts like geopower. So if we apply if biopower is toward the population, geopower is toward territories and landscapes. So what the state is, again, I'm going to talk later about the state, because it's not one monolithic entity. But if conceptually, to streamline things, what is happening is that through this bureaucratization, it is making the fishing economy legible and measurable. And that can be done for different reasons, and then also can be used for, it's not necessarily that they clearly know what they want from this from now, or maybe different people want different things out of this. So it's not that clear-cut and linear that, the state is doing this for this reason. But this legibility and these measures open up possibilities for governance or for market profits. It may be the case that through this bureaucracy, now more and more businessmen from Yerevan or businessmen closer to the central government can register and start having business relationships with fishers and be involved in the export of fish. Whereas before, since things were shady, it was only the locals who could do that. So that's one thing. Another thing is that through this bureaucratization, fishers are now being obliged to register and pay a nature use fee. That's how it's called. For every kilogram of fish that they catch, they have to pay this much dirham, this much money, and that's income that adds to the budget of the state. And I've asked, where does it go? Does it go back to the preservation efforts for Sevan? And the answer is no, or like we don't know. The local office says that that's not it's not our, like, we don't deal with that. We send it to the ministry and it goes into the general budget of the government. And from the general budget of the government, that money could be used for anything. It could be used to buy the big luxury cars of the ministers, for example. So the nature use fee from the use of fish might be turning into the cars of the ministers or into the big Christmas tree on the square of Yerevan, which costs millions. But this, of course, is portrayed by according to the official state narrative, as these fishers are using the national nature. So they cannot use it for free. They are making profit out of it, so they should pay for it. And here I can tell the story of the tomatoes. The locals often say that, like, I heard this story from different people, not story, this claim. They use our water to irrigate the lands in the eastern part of in the Ararat Valley, to then come and sell us those tomatoes that they produce there for higher prices. And the question is, who is, when you said like this, turning Sevan into a monument? Yeah, it's true. That's what's happening. And then we should ask, why? Who does it serve? And often the answer, I'll also tell the fish thief story here. So there is a compound word in Armenian, tsgnakoch, which means thief of fish, which is used very frequently and alternatively with fisherman, to refer to the fishers of Lake Sevan. So instead of saying fisher, they say fish thief. Whenever I said that I was living in this village, they said, "Oh, you're living with the fish thieves." And this is a common, like, it's not in the official state reports. They of course don't use it, but when you talk to a state employee, or not only a state employee, of course not all of them. As I said, things are like, it's a mosaic, and it's easy to. When I'm telling it, I might also reproduce that generalization of turning the state into an entity. But of course, so not all of them, but there is often this, the use of the word fish thief by anyone, like not just state employees, not like even someone who has nothing to do with Lake Sevan. Like, I meet someone in Yerevan and I tell them that I'm living there, and they would refer as fish thief. So it's very common. And it does come from Soviet times, because back then the fishing industry was state-owned. So whoever was fishing on their private boats was referred to as thief, because they were stealing from the state, from state property. But now that there is no state-owned enterprise, fishing is private anyway, just like cultivating tomatoes is. You don't say that someone is stealing a tomato, but because Lake Sevan, it also has to do with the materiality of the part of nature we're talking about. Water is more fluid, and you cannot draw boundaries and enclose water and turn it into property. Like, you cannot say this part of the lake in the water belongs to this person or to this village. That's why it's harder to govern it. And that's why these conflicts become visible there and not on land. I mean, of course, on land there is also a lot of conflict, but it's harder to govern the water. And so when I asked people, why are they fish thieves? Who are they stealing from? The answer is either the state or the people. They're stealing from the people, the nation. Sometimes also from nature or from God. But let's stick with the most common, which is the state or the people. And so if you go deeper into this statement, you realize that according to these people, the fish of Sevan belongs to all of Armenia. But for example, land doesn't belong to everyone because it is enclosed. So we come back to these relations of property and stuff. And also to this idea that for some reason, Lake Sevan has that symbolic value because also it has become part of nation building, I think. And because of its strategic value in terms of resources. It's something that the state really needs, it relies on to build its statehood. So when the fish is catching fish out of it, I could see it as they're doing the labor, and so the product of their labor would belong to them. But according to this fish thief idea, they are taking part of what belongs to the whole nation. And so again, we come back to this idea of who are we? Like, who is deciding? Even when we agree that nature is going to be used, but used for whom, by whom, and who decides that? And that's why there is conflict. So according to the fisher, their ancestors have come there to live by the fish. And they've always been there. And they don't have the climate and the altitude they're on doesn't allow them to have other types of productions. So their like very, very basic subsistence economy is based on the fish. But yeah, from the other perspective, it's a national security question. It's a question of having cheap food for the nation, for the population. So who is the fish being used for is changing.
Yeah, you have this issue that's ever present with like a planned economy, right? Of if it's the government managing resources, there's a whole set of problems. But when it's a corporate environment, it's like you only get the right to consume the fish if you turn into a corporation. You know, if you have enough money, resource to enter the system as a state-sanctioned agent, which is a corporation, then you're allowed to extract fish. Otherwise, you know, as an individual, you're not, which is all completely ridiculous that we're trapped in such a system.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Here I can maybe shift to this concept of the state.
Yeah. Do you want to also lower your mic stand?
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, cool.
So I said I'm gonna move a lot, but I'm stuck here. So at this office, the Sevan National Park, there are many employees who are locals from towns and villages around the lake. And looking at their actions and their words makes very clear this, like, they are in the middle of the debate that I just mentioned because they are part of those communities who have always lived with the fish. They have had family members who have been fishers. They themselves, for example, one person who was supposed to be to do the surveying of one section of the lake, he was a fisher before getting that job. And he got that job just because he needed a job. He was older, he couldn't fish anymore. So he just got that job. and many state employees are, so like, people are not born state employees. They are people like me and you. And we are one day ordinary people. And the next day we are representatives of the state because the job we do is part of that state apparatus. And so the anthropology of the state literature argues a lot against this idea of thinking about the state as one monolithic entity. Because if you look at it, who is the state? All the state employees are ordinary people. They're just They just have a job description based on which they should do what they do. And they might not implement it because they are not being suddenly vacuumed out of those other relations that they've always had. So these state employees at the national park, they have always had those kinship relations, neighborly relations, friendships with fishers. They have themselves been fishers. They have gone through that experience of the 90s, for example, the cold and dark days when it was only the fish that the fish was the source of survival. So they are not blank sheets of paper who are suddenly getting this job description, state job description on them. They have their experiences, their relationships, and everyone who works in the state apparatus is like that. So, and when we take this seriously, it kind of demystifies this state. And the anthropological argument is that like there is an idea of the state that we all reproduce or sometimes go against if we argue for the dismantlement of states or if we question borders or the way states govern populations. There we are going against this idea. But often we are also reproducing it by the fact that we keep referring to this idea of the state, which we cannot locate anywhere, but it's still there. It's above us, as if. I don't know. Like I remember this. I had written like a field note exercise as an undergrad in Lebanon about how, like, while driving, because the traffic regulations are almost non-existent, something happened, and I said, this state. And I had written that in my field notes, and my professor was asking, like, who is the state? Who are you talking to? Who are you swearing? So every time we talk about, the state should do this, the state should do that, or the way the state is relating to nature, it is damaging nature. So, like, even in this the conceptual arguments that I mentioned at the beginning about the state's relationship with nature, there is a tendency to recreate this idea of the monolithic state that is on top of us. But when we go on the ground and we look at the empirical data and we look at our own, like, the real life experiences and relationships, we realize that state, it's not there. If we don't want to see it, then it's just a set of relationships that everyone that gets reproduced and constructed because we are thinking about it as being something on its own. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't have an effect. Because even if it is an idea, it still has tangible, material impact on our lives and on nature. But what that means is that we have to try to explain these processes in a more nuanced way that does justice to these complexities and also can open the space for resistance. So, for example, these state employees who have to do the surveillance during the periods of ban, now things changed, and partly this is the reason why it changed. They introduced, 2 years ago, they introduced a new water patrol, like a police department for water.
For patrolling the water?
Yeah.
You're right,
yeah,
for fishing. Or for water
for
use?
everything.
For
no,
everything.
not water use.
Okay.
For even like swimming regulations. They do everything. They catch violations of fishing. They could save people who are drowning. The description is to establish security on Lake Sevan.
Like a coast guard, but for the lake.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes
And
sense.
it's interesting that fishing goes under this. So, like, according to the narrative, a fishing violation is goes against the security. So, like, someone driving a jet ski while being drunk and hitting people is as harmful as someone who is catching fish to feed his family. So now with the introduction of this police patrol, most of the police officers come from other regions, not the province of the lake. And that was intentional. Before, the park rangers of the national park were locals, and they often went against the law of the ban and surveillance. And so when you talk to them, you see that struggle, that they're either talking about the state as like they're ridiculizing it, like even laughing at the laws and the higher ranked employees, using the same discourse as many other fisher uses, or they're trying to stay somewhere in between, because they want their job to keep their job, but also because they do have some idea of the state and what the state should do. In the end, they do belong to this nation state, or the imagined community. They also see themselves as part of that state and nation, and as like in opposition to Azerbaijan, for example. And so there is a war between Azerbaijan and Armenia. So they do, and their kids have been killed at the border, for example. So they do have this belonging to the state too, and they do want a strong state. So at the same time, they belong to this higher scale like nation and the lower scale community. So they are constantly bouncing in their opinions also and their positions about what to do, how to behave toward the lake, toward the fish. So many of them want the fish to be preserved for the future, for the bigger nation. But they also understand the day-to-day pain and the need to catch fish, to feed families, to live in the present. So they're constantly bouncing between these positions, and that in itself is proof of how malleable the boundary is between state and non-state, and how flexible the state itself is.
Yeah, and it's interesting because this is sort of as a side point why the preservation, the prolongation of physical war is existential for populations because they feel it's an existential risk, and then for the governments involved because it's support, it's existential support. It sort of strengthens the position of every government if they're in war, because then individuals are convinced that they need a strong state in order to survive. So it sort of entrenches the state in a better way. And there is also this interesting divide that I've seen a lot just growing up in the center of a city and then traveling a lot and having lived in rural areas, right, is that this problem of if you're in an urban area, a lot of people think or feel intuitively that the state is something that's above them. It's sort of, made divine. But a lot of people in rural areas, I don't know if this is the case there. I remember the first time I had that conversation, it really sort of upended how I saw things. In the rural areas, they see it as a geographic distance a lot more often. They don't see the state as something above their heads. They see it as something far away, laterally, which is crucial, right, for your mental health and your relationship with what the state is, because it's less present. And you just get agents of the state which show up and it's just, like emissaries from a faraway place, which makes it also easier to separate responsibility, right, and the arbitrariness of governance to your everyday life. And one last thing is just that came up related is one of the sort of hallmarks of mismanagement that comes up anywhere in the world somehow is that the closer you are to a national resource, the more likely it is you're impoverished, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't know how that's true everywhere in the world, but if you are close to a natural resource, especially if you're so close that you're working on that natural resource, the likelihood is that your government is making the most profit off of you and that you are the most poor. And I don't know how that happens. It doesn't matter if you're working in a mine, farming chocolate, farming tea, farming fish in Sevan. It always seems to be the case.
Yeah, because it's part of that process of...
You're good. Keep speaking. Yeah.
Okay. Of like getting cheapening parts of nature. Like this is Jason Moore's theory. And that applies to everyone, human labor too. So when you look at humans as being anchored in nature, then you can think about human labor just like energy that you get from nature. So the water's energy and the human body's energy, in that context, they are both cheapened for the sake of the product that you want to get, or like the raw material. And yeah, similar processes have. And it is, so like this theory also says, like Jason Moore, that you cannot, to be able to have labor rights and the more like a fairer labor, like workspace regulations, you'll have to rely on cheap nature much more. Because like if you're, again, it's like the same use and preservation, that separation between the two. If we're preserving our bodies, our energy, that means we need labor rights, right? Like we need those to preserve our health. If we're preserving that, then something on the production chain has to become cheaper. This is, I mean, in capitalist logic. I'm not saying that there is no way to respect those limits everywhere, but that's why we need to think about capitalism, the system, having this relationship with nature and not just humanity generally. And that's where like the term, that's why like some of these authors that I'm referring to reject the term Anthropocene and instead use the term Capitalocene, because the term Anthropocene really generalizes and like puts the blame on all of humanity as if there is no other way that we could relate to nature. But the thing is that there is. It's just the system that we're living in now has put those relations in a way that to make more profit, you constantly have to cheapen some part of nature.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. The means of extraction have improved to such a degree that now, more than ever, it is unsustainable to behave in the ways we've behaved. And I think that that's one of the crucial problems. And sort of paradoxically, we're looking to capitalism to solve those problems as well. So instead of, say, nationalizing certain resources and the production, we're looking to government, to corporations to institute vertical farming and things like that, which great, aquaculture, permaculture, like different permaculture varieties, vertical farming, greenhouses. These are all great solutions to the fact that regardless, the human population is growing. But it doesn't mean anything if corporations are doing those things and they're going to, similarly draw heavily on resources that exist somewhere else in order to work the way that they're working. So what is the framework or labor that you're working with throughout the paper? You're working on like sort of Marxist views on labor.
Yeah,
right.
And so I'm mostly, for now, I'm referring to Jason Moore, who tries to develop this like the Marxist law of value,
right,
on like and apply it on, like, as being anchored in nature. So I think it comes from Marx, this idea that, like, labor in nature and nature in labor. And so the same law of value and the same ideas of alienation, exploitation, etc., can be applied to this framework that doesn't, through this framework that doesn't separate humans from the rest of nature. And so, like, some of the examples that I gave already show that like, for example, I'm trying to think about the Soviet Union through this, that the reason why there was some degree of equality in terms of labor relations and some benefits to the workers was, I think, because a much heavier toll was put on non-human nature. So, and this the, like, Jason Moore's idea, which is also similar to Nancy Fraser, is that, like, the reproductive labor, the riches from the colonies, what's happening inside factories or production chains, these cannot be detached from each other. So to be able to have, for the worker to be able to produce in the factory, let's say, there has to be a woman or someone who is doing the care work at home. And for both of these to be able to live, be fed, or to, let's say, for the worker to produce what they're producing, there has to be an exploitation of non-human nature to get the raw materials. And that is often done through the free labor of others. And that's where racism and colonialism come into the picture. And so this is, like, this law of value in nature kind of connects all of these spheres together and thinks of labor as work energy. It can be the energy of non-humans or the energy of the human body and the labor. And so they're all dependent on each other, and they all create the possibility to have profit and capital accumulation.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. Because it's also what we see through sort of what comes to mind is foreign governments also getting involved, right? And it's not like any system is in isolation. You have all these other systems that are at play, potentially, offering certain resources that might not otherwise be present, but then also sort of messing with the balance. And you had also mentioned, some EU projects coming in, and there's this issue of, even when folks are, say, getting involved in a system because they want to contribute, if they want to contribute but they're stuck inside some sort of neoliberal framework which they don't see as extractive or exploitative, and they come and implement that, it's going to create more challenges, or it's going to create some locally functioning thing, like putting somebody to pedal on a bicycle, but then when you take them off, the bicycle stops running. It just creates a local infrastructure that then people can go back and pat themselves on the back for, and that's hugely problematic. That we see something that I saw a lot working in running a sustainability company, with a lot of everybody sort of vying to almost give you funding so that they can say that they were involved, but this issue is always in place.
Yeah. And this reminded me two things. One is, just like just a confirmation from the fishers also, who there's this project EU for Sevan that tries to implement these green development projects, using organic fertilizers so that the agricultural waste doesn't pollute the lake and stuff like that. But then once they leave, I don't know if the state would be able to subsidize these fertilizers so that people could still use it. So it's just like individual-based solutions, often about raising awareness, and like there were billboards saying "Don't buy fish." So like as if every individual doesn't buy fish, then the fish population would survive. But first of all, that's like killing the job of the fisher. And then you'll have to think about what alternative jobs can the fisher do? Maybe create infrastructure for that. And it doesn't mean that the fisher is not going to fish if no one is not going to buy. And so like these people also, like these EU projects, they had some consultation sessions, focus group discussions with locals. And I was present to many of them, and I noticed that there are no fishers. And then I asked them that, don't you want to invite fishers? And they said that we try, but they never come. And I talked to some fishers, and most of them refused to come. But there is a reason to why. Many of them told us, these people come and talk to us about the problems that we already know. And it was really like that, like the 3/4 of the sessions were spent brainstorming together and writing on the board, what are the problems of Lake Sevan? Water extraction, pollution, Okay, what can we do to decrease pollution? Oh, maybe we should use organic detergent instead of chemical-based detergents and stuff like that. And these people, like, they know what are the problems of Lake Sevan. There is this like condescending tone that always comes with these EU projects. And these fishers were just refusing to go to that, what seemed to them as a joke.
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge issue. Also, passing responsibility on to the individual when really it's an organization problem, right? The state uses power instead of organization as its tool, right? When really the most useful thing that the state is not an agent of power, but an agent of organization. And it's it's so ridiculous that that's what we deal with, even especially in the sustainability realm, where, it doesn't matter if it's sustainably farming fish or sustainable use of resources. They're like, well, you should use less plastic and you should not buy the plane ticket. You should eat less fish. And as opposed to just, okay, we need a better system of organization and governance that can solve that issue. And I don't know who's peddling. I mean, I'm really happy about organic fertilizer, but I don't know who's peddling it around the world, because I saw the same problem in Sri Lanka, where people were pushing organic fertilizer to the point where they even banned non-organic fertilizer for a period of time, which was multiple times the price. And everybody was like, what the fuck are we supposed to do? How can you push this organic fertilizer on us when you are the one who introduced inorganic fertilizer in the first place, right? And there's no way to compete, because there's not even like a government price setting so that farmers are guaranteed what they can get for the produce that they sell. Because the government's like, well, no, in this it's a free market, but with organic fertilizer you have to buy that.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it is again about who is deciding which part should be regulated or not, and who should carry that burden of paying that price from their pocket. And probably there is a businessman behind this fertilizer
almost certainly
industry benefiting from it. And so, like, instead of trying to understand, like, when we put the blame on the individual and the human, and we talk about the Anthropocene, like the humanity destroying nature, then we get blinded toward like this. We don't see these processes and the systemic reasons behind what's happening. And these like EU projects and neoliberal green development initiatives, they just they try to treat the symptom all the while, like in parallel, try not to harm the gains, the interests, like the capitalist intentions or logic of whoever they're representing,
Stakeholders.
yeah, and they don't treat that's the real source, which is the systemic. But also one last thing that I wanted to say was that like these fissures, they're not out of the system. They are part of it, and they also reproduce it. So it is a market economy, and they do want to keep it that way often. So and they may be reproducing these capitalist relations. So it's not, that's why, like, it's a very complex mosaic. You cannot, it's easy, like, maybe in the stories that I told now, I also told it in a way that it's like, oh, the fishers are the good guys and the state employees are the bad guys, but it's not like that. It's both are heterogeneous groups, and both are part of this system. And everyone is acting depending on their own interests, ethical guidelines, their own relationships, and they may be reproducing these systems or going against them at different instances. They may do both. So that's why it is useful to streamline and talk about the system, like what the state is doing, what capitalism is doing. But we shouldn't do, like, we should be careful not to take each of these to the extreme. Like the messiness can go to the extreme, and then we could say, oh, well, it's just chaotic. Something is happening. We don't know what it is. It changes. The boundaries keep shifting. People's positions keep shifting. If we stress a lot on that heterogeneity, then we may not have any explanation. So we do need this, like, abstraction to understand that, okay, there is a systemic way to explain this, and like there are certain processes and systems behind this. But we also shouldn't stick too much on that streamlined notion of the system and the processes, because we lose sight of the complexities within it, and then we wouldn't know how to behave, how to resist it even.
Yeah. And if you can, is there sort of any last conceptual tie-in that you want with, so you first outlined, say the theoretical problem, and then a lot of the on-the-ground anthropological work you've done, sort of the evidence that you've been compiling. And I guess the end result will be something that individuals can read as both a case study, but then as a way to formulate their own opinion as to what the best way to proceed is, in like Sevan. But hopefully there might be some kind of clarity there, I guess, right? Like what's the aim of the project? I guess there's some sort of applied things that maybe people can gain from reading the work that you've done, but then also some kind of theoretical ground that you're trying to gain as well. So maybe you can go over that theoretical ground as well.
I think, I mean, first of all, I get this question a lot of like, okay, so now that you know a lot about Sevan, what do you think is like in case of the applied thing? That's very hard to answer.
Sure, yeah.
It's like I must, if I'm honest, I should say that I've lost hope over the time from like seeing how deep systemic is the problem. But I think the takeaway, also theoretical, is that it goes back to this separation between society and nature, and it speaks to the presence of humans within nature. And, for example, a lot of these nature protection initiatives, they don't consider the humans living in that nature. They just want to preserve the non-human, as if the human is not part of nature. So that, for the applied lesson to take, I think it would be that you cannot preserve like any part of nature if you're leaving the humans out, because they are part of it. And theoretically, I think it's. I mean, I still have to I think I'll have to spend more time writing these, like putting them out there on paper to understand what is my contribution to the literature, besides saying that I'm like complicating the streamlined theories with the anthropological data, and I'm bringing to the anthropological the like more systemic explanations, let's say. But yeah, exactly how, like the arguments that I will end up having, I'm still not sure. I will have to write more and more to see, okay, where are the gaps? And I think like in the end, it might be like little like sub arguments that build together to make a bigger claim. But I like, from what I know now is that that's like, it would be something about the constant shifting of this separation line between nature use and nature preservation according to different projects of, like, whether capitalist projects, statecraft projects, or community level subsistence related reasons, like that these different processes interact to constantly shift this boundary between using and preserving nature, and that we need to do justice to that changing line and the and the different groups and interests that lie behind it. And the power relations, mostly, I think. Like that's the most important, or at least politically, it's the most important for me to understand that environmentalism or nature protection is never separate from economic and political processes. It's not a different field. They're the same thing.
Yeah, definitely. And what, taking sort of a longer view of your work, why you're doing the work that you're doing? Not necessarily about Lake Sevan, but why anthropology? Why the methods? Sort of, what are you looking to do or gain out of it?
Why anthropology? I think, like, often whenever I'm reading anthropology or like going through, like just thinking about my fieldwork, I really think that I wish everyone studied anthropology because it's really, I feel that as scholars we're often detached from the real life, and we try to theorize and abstract everything to the extent that we forget what's happening on the ground in real life. And anthropology maybe does that less compared to other disciplines because its data is like primarily, it comes from that real life. And it always reminds us of how more messy, more complex things are. And I think I like seeking explanations to things, and let's say through this research understanding like what is behind the claim that, oh, we're destroying nature, and what is actually happening, like what are the more tangible relations. I think like I have a problem with abstract theories. So I guess this is, and these methods and this anthropological approach is my way to find an explanation, even if just for myself, to these big ideas, like to apply these big ideas and to explain the big processes of the world that happen even over centuries, but through very, like, to be able to explain them through very tangible examples that I could apply to other things also happening in life and around us. So this approach it may be applied to this topic. It can also be applied to any other topic. I don't know, understanding religion or different things we live with.
Yeah, right on. Is there anything we didn't cover that you'd like to cover, or like you to add to the conversation?
I don't think so.
Cool.
I have lots of stories that I could have told from the field, but
Unless there's
it's
any,
hard to pick one and
that's fair.
remember. So it's okay.
Okay, cool. I feel like we covered a lot of ground. So I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much.
It was very nice for me too.